This chapter, we are focusing from the firm's perspective. We are looking at how they decide to produce in terms of the quantity and in terms of choosing the factors of production, and also looking at how the production side affects the cost. So over here, we will start with the production theory. So this chapter is separated into two major portions. We have the production theory and we have the cost theory. Right, so we're going to start from the production side. So first of all, we say that there is a difference in terms of the production period. We have the short run. So the short run is defined as the period where one factor of production is held fixed. So here, by convention, the factor of production that is held fixed is capital goods. So capital goods will include the machineries, the equipment, all this technology that the firm is using. So let's say in the case of an airline company, the capital goods would be the airlines, the airplanes that the firm is buying. So if they decide to increase more flights and they require more airplanes, and let's say they order from a company such as Boeing, then it will take time for the airplanes to be delivered over to the airlines, right? So from the time of delivery, from the time of order to the time that the planes actually arrive, we call this period the short run, right? So within this period, the number of planes in the airlines doesn't change. It doesn't increase, nor does it decrease. So this is referred to as the short run. Then in another case, let's say in a factory, they are buying some machines to produce t-shirts or to produce any product for that matter. Then from the time that they order the items to the time that the machines, the equipments get delivered over to the factory, this is also referred to as the short run. So there is actually no fixed period to determine or to define how long the short run is or how short it is. It doesn't mean that 6 months is the short run or more than 1 year will then be considered the long run, right? So it depends on how long the factory or let's say the company in general can get the capital goods, right? So within this period, the only variable factor of production or input is the labor. So if the firm wants to produce more items, then they can just increase the number of the quantity of labor that they have. Then on the other side, after a certain period of time, right, we come on to the long run. So the long run is defined as the period where all factors of production are variable. So in this longer period, this longer horizon, the firms are able to adjust the number of workers that they employ and also the quantity of the machineries, the equipment that they also use, right? So everything here, all the factors of production, they are variable. We consider this as a long run. Okay, so in the short run, only capital goods are fixed and only the labor is variable in terms of quantity, whereas in the long run, all factors of production here, they can be adjusted in terms of the quantity. Right, so what is the implication here? So we look at this table. This table here illustrates the changes in production in the short run, right? So we can see here that first of all, the quantity of the labor is all different. Okay, it's changing. So we start with 1 and then 2 and all the way to 5 units of labor. So the quantity of workers is here changing. Then for capital goods, it is actually held fixed, right? So throughout the whole production process or throughout the whole sequence here, we have only got 5 units of capital goods, right? So there's only 5 machines or there's only 5 units of equipment for use. So this stays the same. Now, we come on to look at the production side, right? So let's say here we start with the first unit of worker. So the first unit of worker coupled with 5 units of machineries, what is the total unit of production that he alone produces? Right, so if we bring in the first unit, so you see 1 here, this represents the first worker. So the first worker, how many units did he or she produce, right? So we see that the total output is now at 10. So that means the total amount that has been produced is 10 units, right? So that's what the total output represents. Then we go on to the next one, which is marginal output. So marginal here means the next unit, right? So marginal output means with an additional unit of worker, what is the additional number of output or the units of output that have been produced. So one more unit of worker will now produce 10 more units of output because that person alone has increased the total from 0 to 10, right? So we say that the marginal output is also 10 units, right? Then the last part, which is the average, we see that it is also 10. So we use the total, which is currently 10, and we divide by one worker. So 10 over 1, we get 10 units on average, right? So that gives us the average. So here, this is quite straightforward for the first worker. We come on to look at the second worker, right? So it comes when we have the second worker, then the total is now 12, right? So the total is now 12. So previously it was 10 and it is now 12. So this worker alone has produced an additional 12 units of output, right? Because it was 10 in total and now it is 22. So the difference here is 12 units, and this was because of the second unit of worker, right? So the marginal output is now 12 for the second unit of worker, and the average is now at 11. So again, we have a total of 22 units, and we divide the 22 units by 2 workers, and that gives us 11 units on average for each worker, right? So there will be 11 units on average. The next one, we have 3 units or third unit of labor, right? So here, the quantity of the labor, we can think of it in 2 different ways. Let's say if we look at 3 here, it can mean the third unit of labor, or it can mean 3 units of labor in total, right? So with the third unit of labor, so the third worker comes in, then the total is now 36. Right, so from 22 previously, it has now become 36. So the total output is currently at 36 units, and then the marginal output is calculated to be 14. So we had 22 units previously, and it is now 36. The additional amount is 14. Right, so 14 here represents the marginal output, and then the average is 12. Okay, so for the fourth unit of labor, the total output is 46. So from 36, it has now increased to 46. And we say that the marginal output here of the fourth unit is 10 units. So the fourth worker alone produces 10 extra units, right? And it has caused the average to drop to 11.5 units, right? And then for the fifth worker, the last one, the total is now 51 with the introduction of the fifth worker. And the marginal output here, the additional units produced is just 5, and the average has now dropped back to 10.2, right? So we can see that, first of all, in terms of the trend in the productivity, right? So the workers were getting more and more productive at first, right? Initially, in the first few units of production, the workers were actually getting more and more productive than the previous worker, right? So we can see that the marginal output was 10, and then 12, and then 14, right? So the subsequent worker was more productive than the previous one. And then to a certain point, once we go past the third worker, we see that the marginal output is now starting to decrease. So instead of going from 14 to 16 to 18 and so on, it has now dropped to 10. So the fourth worker is actually less productive than the third worker, right? So he's getting less and less productive or efficient. Then by the time we come to the fifth worker, it is now the least efficient because there's only 5 additional units being produced, right? So you're getting less and less efficient, and that of course will cause the total to increase at a smaller pace, right? As we can see here. And also at the same time, we realize an interesting relationship between marginal and average, right? So whenever the marginal is higher than the average, it will pull up the average. Okay, so what we mean by this, now imagine that we have a room full of, let's say, of children. There are 4 of them, and the average of the 4 children's height, right, is 1.5 meter. Okay, so the average of the 4 children's height is 1.5 meter. So if we introduce a 5th child into the room, and the average is 1.7 meter, right? His height is 1.7. So the fifth child's height is 1.7 meters. And we go into that room, which had the average height of 1.5. The fifth child is going to pull up the average, right? Because his height, the marginal height, is higher than the average. Conversely, if the fifth child is only 1 meter tall, then he is going to pull down the average of the room, because the 1 meter brought in is going to pull down the average, right? Because it was lower than 1.5. So similarly here, when the marginal was higher, let's say the second worker, marginal product was 12, or marginal output was 12, the previous average was 10. It will now pull up the average to 11. Then we look at the third worker, the marginal output was 14, and it pulled up the average to 12 in this case. So as long as the marginal output was higher, it was pulling up the average output as well. Okay, then subsequently, when we see that the marginal output started to reduce and it was below the average, it was pulling down the average. So there exists this relationship between the marginal and the average, whether in terms of output or it could be in terms of any variable, right? So that is one relationship we have to be aware of. And the other thing is we see here that the trend in the production, the marginal output is, it starts to go up at first. So the workers were getting more and more productive, and then to a certain point and beyond that, it starts to fall. So there is this declining trend in terms of the productivity, right? So we say that this is because of the issue of overcrowding. So we can see here, this is because of overcrowding. So as we have more and more workers coming in, and the number of units of capital goods remains the same. So that means there is no change in the number of machineries, and then the number of workers is increasing and increasing. There are too many people, too many workers relative to the number of machines, right? So then it causes this this upset of balance. So there are too many people and there's not enough equipment to use. It starts to reduce the productivity in the production, right, or in the company. So then it will lead to a decrease in the productivity. So that is what we see here in terms of the decrease in the marginal output. Okay, so we call this the law of diminishing returns, right? So the law of diminishing returns will say that because of this decline in the productivity, the more workers that we get, the subsequent units of worker that we get, we are going to face less and less additional output. So this will be the problem that we see here, right? So the corresponding graph that we see, let's say this diagram that we see here, we find that let's say this one with the point A, right? So this is the marginal product or the marginal output curve. We see that this is what we mentioned just now. It was pushing up at first, and then it is coming down. So it was pushing up at first, and then it starts to slope down. So it's sort of like an N shape, right? The letter N. So it's an N-shaped curve. And also, right, when we pair this up with the average product curve, we can also see the relationship between marginal and average. So we see here that as long as the marginal curve was higher than the average, as long as the marginal product curve was higher than the average, it was pulling up the average. So the average curve was actually sloping upwards, right? And then once we go past point B, so point B is like the dividing line, the dividing point. So once we go beyond point B, we see that marginal product starts to slope down and it's already below the average product curve. So when it is below the average product, it will pull down the average product, right? So beyond point B, average product curve is sloping downwards because the marginal product is lower than the average, it is pulling down the average. So this is how we understand the production side. So we see that at first there was increasing productivity, and then subsequently we have a declining productivity, right? And why is this the case? Because in the short run, the quantity of your capital goods, the machineries, remains the same. So it is not able to handle the rising number of workers. So this leads to the declining productivity for each worker. All right. So now we come on to the cost side, right? So we've addressed the production side. Now we come on to the cost side. So in terms of understanding the total cost of production, there are a few ways to do so, right? The first one here is the first way to categorize the cost. Okay, so these are different ways of categorizing. We do not need to consider all of them at the same time, right? So depending on what the question or what the context is, right, then we may understand the total cost as either explicit and implicit cost, or we use other ways to categorize them subsequently. Okay, so the first method here will be explicit cost and implicit cost, right? So when we add these two types of cost up together, we will get the total cost of production. So explicit cost here represents an actual payment, right? So this is what the accountants record in the financial statements. Okay, so if, for example, a firm produces t-shirts and it requires cotton or any other material to produce that garment, then the amount paid to the supplier, for example, will represent an explicit cost. So for instance, in the slide here, it mentioned that it paid $1,000 to buy raw materials, right? So there was an actual payment of $1,000, or $1,000 actually exchanged hands. So this is considered as an explicit cost. Okay, so this is also what the accountants will record in the financial statement or the income statement, to be specific. All right. Now, the other one would be the implicit cost. So implicit cost here represents an opportunity cost, right? So if you recall, when we talk about opportunity cost in the central problem of economics video, right, we said that this does not represent an actual payment. We don't actually pay anyone anything, but we are losing some sort of a benefit, right? So for instance, we own a factory, right? This is an asset. So if we were to rent out this factory, then we may get a rental income of $5,000 per month, right? So this is one scenario that you can choose. The other scenario is we use the factory ourselves. We do not rent out, but we use it for our own production, right? So we produce items and we sell to customers, okay? So if we were to choose to use the factory to produce our own goods, then we are giving up the rental income that we could have generated, right? So this rental income per month represents an implicit cost. So first thing, the factory did not incur any actual cost of $5,000. The owner simply is not able to earn $5,000 per month anymore because it is not able to, or it is not renting out the factory in this scenario, right? Because it's using for its own production. So the accountants will not include this $5,000 into the cost on the financial statements because there was no actual payment, but the economist will actually include this $5,000 into its consideration. So suppose now we have these two numbers. We have $1,000 of for paying the raw materials, and we are foregoing $5,000 per month, right? So for the business, right, how much does it actually have to generate in terms of revenue to cover this cost to actually break even, right? So from the accountant's point of view, $1,000 will be sufficient because only $1,000 was paid. So if this business is able to sell the items and get and collect $1,000 from customers, then it would have already broken even, right? So it's already at break even level. But on the other hand, if you are looking at the economy's perspective, then it says that $1,000 alone is not enough because we pay $1,000 and we are giving up a $5,000. So in order to break even, according to the economist, you have to at least generate $6,000 so that it will also cover the portion that we are losing out, right? So think in another way, suppose we choose to rent out and we don't have to go through the whole process of production, sales, marketing, and so on. We could have already generated $5,000 per month, right? So if the business is only generating $2,000 or $3,000 per month, then wouldn't it be better to just rent out the factory and not have to go through the whole process of production just to earn $3,000, right? So for the economists, the implicit cost portion is also relevant, is also an important consideration. Okay. Now, the next way to categorize the total cost of production will be to split them into variable and fixed. Okay, so to split them into the variable and fixed nature, right? So for fixed costs, we say that these are costs that do not change with the output levels. Okay, so fixed costs are costs that do not change with the output level. So no matter how much we produce or the business produces, the fixed cost remains the same throughout. So this could be the example of rental, right? So once we rent a factory, whether we produce 1,000 units or we produce 1,000,000 units, the rental amount is the same per month, right? Unless, of course, if we choose to rent another factory, right, that will be a separate thing. But within this factory itself, if we were to just produce any amount, right, the rental stays the same. Okay. On the other hand, for variable cost, we say that it is a cost that varies according to the differences in the output level. So the more we produce, the higher the variable cost, right? The higher the variable cost when we produce. So this will be represented by the curves over here. All right. So we see that first of all, we have the total fixed cost TFC, which is shown by the red line or the red curve. All right, so this red curve here is a horizontal line. It represents a fixed nature. Okay, so it starts from above zero because even if you don't produce anything, you have to pay the amount, right? A certain amount. So this starts at that level, but it remains constant throughout. So no matter the level of output, the cost here remains the same. Okay, so that is the total fixed cost. Total variable cost is generally sloping upwards, right? This is represented by the blue curve below. It starts from the origin, right? So if we produce nothing, we pay nothing, all right? Then once we start producing, the total variable cost TVC is starting to slope upwards. So it will go up. Now, the interesting thing here is it doesn't go up linearly, right? It is not a straight line upwards. It is instead a curve, right? So it curves and bends at two main points. So we can see that over here, as it progresses from the origin, it starts to curve, and then subsequently it starts to get a bit flatter. And then later on, as we go through, as we bypass a certain output level, it starts to get very, very steep, right? So the curve was more gentle at first, and it gets way steeper later on, right? So this is the trend that we observe. Now, why this? Okay, so if you recall from the earlier production theory, we say that in terms of the productivity, the workers were more efficient earlier on because they were getting more and more specialized. The second worker was able to tap into the experience and the expertise of the first one, and the third one could learn from the previous two, and so on. So productivity was increasing in the initial stage, all right? So as you have more workers, the total variable cost will be increasing, right? Because you're paying more salary, paying more wages. But the pace of increase is going to slow down. So suppose today we hire the same worker $10 per hour, right? This worker produces 10 units. Every unit will cost an average $1. Okay? But if the next worker comes in and produces 20 units for the same salary, then every unit will just cost 50 cents, right? So the more that they produce and the wages are the same on an hourly basis, then we get a lower and lower average cost, right? So this means that the total cost here, the variable cost here, is increasing very, very gradually because the pace of increase is slower given the higher and higher productivity of the workers, right? So it's getting slower and slower. So then the increase is at a more gradual pace up to a certain point, right? Up to a certain point, then you find that the pace of increase starts to get very fast. So at the later stages, right, we also recall that the law of diminishing returns sets in, right? So there is this overcrowding problem too many workers relative to the number of capital goods, because the units of machinery stays the same, right? The quantity of the machinery stays the same. So then we will have we are going to have the workers getting less efficient, and it will cost the firms more, right? So the total variable cost will start to increase at a more accelerated pace. So it will start to increase very quickly. Okay, so this is why the TVC doesn't go up linearly, because the pace of increase is not constant throughout, right? It was increasing slowly, then increasing more steeply, or more at a more accelerated pace later on. All right. Then if you put these two together, right, if you were to add up these two components, the total variable cost and the total fixed cost, then we are going to have the total cost of production. This is shown by the green line over here, right? So we see that it starts at where the TFC starts, right? So if you were to produce nothing, then the only cost here to pay is the total fixed cost, right? So it will start from the total fixed cost, the same starting point. But the moment we start producing, then we are going to pay both the variable cost and the fixed cost, right? So we're going to pay the two components. So then the total cost curve follows the slope, the shape of the TVC. Okay, so it follows the slope, and we realize that the distance between the green and the blue curves will always remain the same. Okay, so you see that the slope here, the distance between them always remains the same. It is like a parallel shift, right? So the gap always remains the same, because total cost minus total variable cost, or TC minus TVC, the distance or the difference between them is the total fixed cost, right? And total fixed cost doesn't change. So if this number is always the same, then when you translate this into the graph, the distance between the green and the blue curves should not change as well, right? So this is how we understand the total cost of production. Okay, now on the other side, we can also look at the average cost curve. So we say that if we were to divide all the cost by the quantity produced, by the units of output produced, then we'll end up with the average cost, right? So previously, we had the total cost equals to the total fixed plus the total variable cost. Now, we will have the average total cost, which is equal to the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. All right, so this one here is the same equation as above, just that we divide by the quantity to get the average. Okay, so we look at the cost curves that we explained just now. So here we have the average cost curves. Okay, so let's say we start from the AFC, right, the purple one. So average fixed cost is where you use the total fixed cost divided by your output. Okay, so TFC divided by Q. So the more we produce, the lower this average fixed cost gets. Okay, the more we produce, the lower this AFC gets, because we are spreading the fixed cost over more units, right? So it gets closer and closer to zero. Okay, then we look at the AVC. AVC is the average variable cost, right? So we see that because of the production side, right, because of the increase in the productivity at first, the cost to produce the next unit, or the average variable cost, was on a declining trend at first, right? So you see that for both the AVC and also this red one, the marginal cost curve, both were going down initially, right? So both were going down initially. So they were sloping downwards, and then later on, it was going upwards. So the moment the marginal cost and the average variable cost was going upwards, this means that the productivity has started to decline. Okay, so that will push up the average cost to produce, and also the cost to produce the additional units of output. All right. Then, you look at the last one, the blue curve, right? We have the blue average cost curve. So the average cost curve, as we saw just now, right, for the total cost and the total variable cost, the slope is the same. Okay, so here, as we explained just now, the TC and the TVC, the slopes are the same, right? So following this convention, the AC curve, the light blue, and the AVC curves, the slopes are also the same. They're all U-shaped. right? So that means it was getting cheaper and cheaper on average to produce. This was where the productivity was rising for the workers, and subsequently, as we saw the decline in the productivity, then the average cost started to go up, right? So this is a U-shaped trend for the cost curve. So we also have a U-shaped AC or average cost curve, right? But the different thing here is the gap between the blue and the green curves are not constant. Okay, so just now we looked at this and we saw that the gap between the green and the blue curves here, they were the same, right? Because TFC was constant throughout. But in this scenario, because your average fixed cost is declining, the more we produce, the less of the fixed cost that we have on average for each unit. So then this will cause the gap between these two curves to get smaller and smaller. So it gets narrower and narrower as a result. Okay, so it is not drawn like this for fun, but there's actually a reason for that. All right. Now, so far we've talked about the short run side. So short run was where you have the capital goods held fixed, right? So we can't change the quantity of your capital goods yet. But we come on to the long run now. So in the long run, we say that all the factors of production are actually variable. So think of it as a very long period ahead, let's say 5 years, 10 years later. And the firm now is in a planning period, right? So it could actually decide whether to produce at this quantity or that quantity, or even to shut down if they don't want to continue producing, right? So in the long run, right, we say that the cost curve or the average cost curve is actually shown in this manner. Okay, so we call this the LRAC curve. All right. So this long run average cost, this represents different outputs that the firms can actually produce. Okay, because bear in mind, this is a very long period ahead. So they are now thinking about the future, they are planning ahead, and they could choose to produce at any quantity, right? So any quantity that they produce, then they will be producing at the lowest cost possible, So here it will make up the average cost curve, right, in the long run. Okay, so we see that it is U-shaped, right? So there is this trend over here. On the left side, we have this quantity or this range of products of output that we can produce, and we are experiencing this thing called the economies of scale, right? So what it means here is the more that we produce, the cheaper it becomes on average, right? So every unit gets cheaper and cheaper to produce, so long as we produce within this range. Okay, so the reasons for economies of scale could be due to many reasons, right? So let's say one could be bulk discounts. Okay, so the firms are able to buy the raw materials in bulk. They will be able to obtain some discounts from the supplier, right? So the supplier says, okay, because you buy in bulk, I'll give you a cheaper price for each unit of the raw material. Okay, so then as a result, because you're producing more, the average cost is now lower, right? So the more we produce, the lower the average cost. Okay, then up to a certain point, there is a constant cost. So every unit that you produce will cost the same. The more we produce, the average cost is going to stay the same. All right. Then beyond this range, we have the diseconomies of scale. So these economies of scale refers to where you have a range of output, and then the more we produce, the more expensive it becomes. Okay, so why is it the case? So for example, the workers, right? Because at this higher range of output, you are producing at a larger volume, the company has achieved a certain size, and probably they will have set up specialized departments, right? So you contrast with a firm that's not producing as much. Probably one person will be doing a lot of different job roles, job scopes, right? Because they can't afford to hire as many workers. So the tasks are not specialized, right? One person can be the human resource and the accounting and the marketing, right? But in a larger company, you have specialized departments. This person is just doing HR. This person is just doing accounting. That person is just doing marketing, right? So the roles are more clearly defined. So then as the roles are more and more defined, right, and the roles are more narrow because you are getting more specialized, this could lead to some degree, right, of disengagement, because the workers are feeling less interested because they're doing the same thing day in and day out, right? They're getting more specialized as well, but they are not interested because psychologically they turn off, right? So they are not engaged as before. This reduces their efficiency. Okay, so you have this whole range of the output level where you experience different changes in your average cost of production. Okay, so this happens in the long run. All right. Now, after the cost, we come on to the revenue side. Okay, so revenue side, we say that these are also this is what we earn from selling outputs. Okay, so if we sell a ballpoint pen for $1 and we sell five of them, right, we earn $5 from selling 5 units, right? So this is revenue. Now, in terms of revenue, we have to differentiate between the price takers and the price makers. Okay, so the price takers are the firms which cannot set their own prices. Okay, so in this scenario, there are too many firms in the market, and then because of the high level of competition, the firms have very little leeway to set a different price. Suppose you set a higher price than your competitors, then the consumers are not going to buy from you, right? Because there are other firms to choose from. Then if you choose a lower price, then probably yes, you will get a lot of customers in. But then again, why are you setting a lower price when you can actually sell as many as you want at the current price, right? And also, if you set a lower price, competitors may also buy up your products at that lower price to resell. So it makes it difficult for the firms to adjust the prices higher or lower, right? So in this case, then what price are the firms actually selling at? We say that they are actually setting the price at where demand and supply determines the price to be, right? So in the demand supply video, we saw how the interaction between demand and supply will give us the equilibrium price and quantity, right? So that equilibrium price, or we call it the market price, is where all the firms are selling at. So every firm is selling at the same price. So in a sense, there's this sense of being uniform, right? So that is the case with a price taker, okay? Because there are too many competitors, it gives them very little leeway to set their own price, okay? Now, on the other side, we have the price makers, okay? So price makers will be the firms that are able to set their own prices, okay? So generally, as we have less competition, the lower the level of competition, the higher the ability of the firms to set their own prices. Okay, so if there's only one firm in the market, then it is up to the firm, the only firm, to set its own price, right? So it gives it a lot of power to set any price it wants because it is the only firm. Okay, and you throw in things like this product is a necessity, people need it, right, in order to continue living. And because of that, they have a low PD value, right? So the demand for this product is price inelastic, and that allows the firm to set a very high price to profit off the consumers. Okay, but also on the other hand, you may have some firms that are able to set their own prices, but not to a very large extent, right? So let's say the cafes, okay, so around the country, right, within the country itself, you can have many cafes. So they are different because the cakes, the snacks, the drinks that they sell are different. So no two cafes are the same, right? To the eyes of the consumers, they are seen as being different. But the degree of distinction or differentiation may actually determine how differently they can set their price, right? So if generally the cafes are selling one slice of cake at $7, it will be a bit difficult to justify charging $20, right, for one slice of cake in your cafe, okay, unless you can say that it's very different, it's very delicious, or it has some expensive ingredients or so on, right? Otherwise, you're not able to charge at $20. But if you sell it at $8, $9, consumers probably will still continue patronizing if they find that it is still a worthwhile deal. All right. So depending on the degree of differentiation, right, amongst the competitors, it will give the firm some degree of the pricing ability, right? So they can set their own prices. Okay, now we look at the case first of the price taking firm or the price taker firm. Okay, so price taker, again, the firms are not able to set their own prices, right? So all the firms are selling at the same price, and this price is the market price. Okay, so this is the equilibrium price. Now, we look at the diagram on the right side first. We say that here, all the units are sold at the same price, right? All the units are sold at the same price. So every unit on average earns the firm the same amount of revenue. Okay, every unit on average earns the firm the same amount of revenue. It is the same, right? Let's say every unit is selling for $5, right? So every unit earns the firm on average $5. So you see that here, AR is the average revenue. It is represented by a horizontal curve. Okay, because every unit is sold for the same price, every unit earns the same revenue on average, right? So it's horizontal. Then we also have the marginal revenue. Marginal revenue represents the revenue earned from selling one additional unit of output, right? So I sell one more unit, how much extra revenue do I earn? And that is also the same $5, right? Because the price is not going to change. So you sell one more, you earn the same as what you did for the previous units, right? And the subsequent units are also going for the same price. So the marginal revenue is also the same. So here, average revenue and marginal revenue are represented by the same horizontal curve. Okay, so this is how we interpret this curve. Total revenue here is a constant upward sloping curve, right? Very straightforward. So every unit that you sell, right, you earn the same additional amount. So I sell one more unit, I get $5 more. I sell a second unit, I get another $5. So the pace of increase in the total revenue is actually constant, right? So it's shown by this upward sloping, this linear curve. Okay, so every unit that you sell, you get the same additional amount of revenue. All right, so this is the case with the price taker firm. Now, in the case of a price maker, right, this is the firm that's able to set its own price. Then this is a different context, right? So we see that the MR curve and the AR curve, they are now downward sloping. They are not the same as the horizontal curve as we see here. Okay, so in the case of a price maker firm, it is actually a downward sloping AR and a downward sloping MR curve, right? So what is the situation here? Okay, so this is the case. As we increase the price, right? So in order for the firms to sell more, in this case, they will have to reduce the price, right? So in order to sell more, the firms can choose to make it cheaper. Conversely, if we were to raise the price, let's say the firm decides to charge a higher price, the quantity demanded will drop, right? The quantity that is being bought will actually fall. Okay, so the higher the price, the lower the quantity, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity. So there is this inverse relationship between the price and the quantity itself. You can see that based on this example, right? The marginal revenue is actually negative because when we only sold 4 units, the total revenue was $20. Now we sell 5 units, the total revenue is only 15. Right, so the drop from 20 to 15 is a $5 decrease. So when you sell the 5th unit, your total revenue drops by $5. So the marginal revenue can actually go to the negative range, right? So that's why we see that the marginal revenue here is in the negative range. Okay, so that's one way to explain. Then by adjusting the numbers in the example, right? Suppose now the price doesn't drop to $3, it will drop to just $4.90. Right? So there's only a small drop in the price to increase your sales, then the marginal revenue will not be negative anymore. Right? Suppose now you were selling 4 units at $5 each. Now you are selling 5 units at $4.90 each. Right? So the marginal revenue would be a positive number instead because you're earning more by selling the next unit. Okay, but the complication here is because we are setting a different price when you want to sell more, right? You are setting a different price for all the previous units. That makes it difficult to calculate. Okay, so based on that, we can see that marginal revenue could be positive, it could also be negative, right? And average revenue, why is it above and not the same curve as the MR curve? Okay, so AR curve or average revenue actually represents the demand curve in this situation. Okay, so it is the demand curve instead, right? So for example, if we were to sell four units at $5 each, right? The same example, we reduce the price to $3, right? And we sell one more unit. Okay, so the marginal revenue is -5, right? So we go from 20 to just $15 in the total revenue. So you see that marginal revenue is -5. What is the current price of the item? It is actually $3. Okay, so when I reduce the price to $3, right, it doesn't mean that selling an additional unit will earn me $3 more. You could actually lose revenue from selling one more unit because you're lowering your prices at the same time, right? So we can see that the price, which is the average revenue, is not the same as the marginal revenue here. Okay, so that is why the AR curves and the MR curves are actually separated in this context. Okay, so to put it all together, right? To put it all together, we can see that how do we want to achieve maximum profits, right? So how does a firm actually achieve the maximum profits? It is when we put all these curves together, and the first thing that we do is we want to find this specific quantity, right? So this quantity here is known as the profit maximizing quantity, right? It is the output level which maximizes the profits of the firms. So here is the intersection point, right, between the MC curve and the MR curve. Okay, so the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve, when we intersect together, this is where we will find the quantity that maximizes profits. Why do we say that? Now, suppose we sell another unit for $5, right? That is your marginal revenue. And the additional cost to produce that unit is just $3. Okay, so marginal revenue is $5, you earn $5. Marginal cost is $3, it costs you additional $3, right? So this unit earns an additional profit of $2. Okay, so if this is the case, do we stop producing now? Not yet, right? Because the next unit that we produce earns additional $2. Right? If you continue this way, you are getting more and more profits. So at this current moment, at this current output level, your profits have not yet been maximized because there is more to be earned. Suppose, right, let's say the next unit you produce, your revenue is $5, but the cost is $8, right? So additional or the marginal revenue is $5, the marginal cost is $8. By producing one more unit, we are going to lose another $3. All right. So the more we produce, the more losses we are going to chalk up. So if this is the case, then we will not proceed further. We will not produce anymore. So we see that if we are experiencing marginal revenue higher than the marginal cost, we continue producing, right? If we are going to see marginal cost higher than marginal revenue, we are not going into that region. In fact, if we are already in that region, we should reduce the production from the start, right? Let's say now you are imagining into the future, okay? So if you happen to be in that range of output where the cost is higher than revenue, then we shouldn't have gone into that range from the beginning, right? So where is that sweet spot where profits have already been maximized and you do not produce any further? That is where MR equals to MC, right? So the marginal revenue and the marginal cost, they are the same. Then that is going to allow the quantity that we produce to maximize the profits. Okay, so then we do not produce anymore and we do not produce less than the Q, right? Because if there's any difference from Q, then we are going to not get the maximum profits.